If someone had told Dr. Ethan Calloway that his life would pivot on a spilled cup of coffee and a smudged charcoal sketch, he would have laughed bitterly. Instead, he found himself staring at a stranger, drenched under a drizzle in Brooklyn, looking like he might break if someone so much as sneezed in his direction. The first time Ethan saw Mason, the alpha was balancing a battered sketchpad in one hand and a takeout coffee in the other, his eyes wide, unguarded, and entirely, devastatingly human. And Ethan, the quintessential Omega doctor who prided himself on rationality, order, and control, felt something unfamiliar coil in his chest. "Watch where you're going," Ethan snapped, adjusting his white coat. He had every right to be irritable, had been late for rounds, but the sight of Mason tripping over the uneven pavement made him hesitate mid-scold. Sorry, Mason stammered, cheeks flushed, holding his sketchpad close like it could shield him from the storm of Ethan's gaze. His voice was soft, melodic, almost trembling with the quiet intensity of an alpha completely unaware of his own power over others. Ethan blinked, surprised at the sharp stab of warmth crawling up his spine. He hated that feeling. He hated how quickly Mason's presence made him forget protocols, patient charts, even lunch. The rain began to drizzle harder, and Ethan instinctively offered his umbrella, not because he cared for his neighbor's art supplies, but because his instincts as Omega as they were could not ignore vulnerability when it shimmered so clearly. "Here, take this," Ethan said, holding it out stiffly, as if the gesture could remain clinical. Mason looked at him, startled, like Ethan had suddenly proposed a merger of universes. "Oh, thanks," Mason whispered, ducking under the small canopy of the umbrella. Their shoulders brushed, fleetingly, and Ethan's breath hitched. He cursed under his breath, mentally cataloging that Mason's hair smelled faintly of charcoal dust and city rain, a scent that would haunt him during long, sterile hospital nights. From that day on, Ethan found excuses to walk Mason's route whenever rain threatened, an almost absurdly small detour for someone usually immaculately punctual. Mason, in turn, began sketching in the courtyard outside the hospital, ostensibly for practice, though Ethan suspected it was to catch glimpses of him. Their conversations started small. The weather, the city, the absurdity of overpriced coffee. But beneath every polite sentence and guarded smile, there was a tremor, a magnetic pull neither could ignore. Mason was 23, fragile in appearance yet strong in spirit. He wore his emotions openly, sketching his heart onto paper with every line. Ethan, 28, had a reputation for being cold, meticulous, almost unervingly detached, an Omega doctor who never let feelings dictate his decisions. Yet Mason saw through the armor with a clarity that unsettled Ethan in a way he would never admit aloud. It was a Tuesday evening when everything began to shift irreversibly. Ethan was leaving the hospital late, his coat drenched from the relentless rain. Mason appeared as if conjured from a dream, standing under the flickering glow of a street lamp, sketchpad hugged to his chest, eyes wide with worry. "You're soaked," Mason said, voice soft. "I can walk with you. I don't want you to catch a cold." Ethan paused. The words, though simple, carried an intimacy that made his chest constrict. He was supposed to be the protector, the caregiver, yet here was Mason, an alpha barely older than 20, worrying for him. "I'm fine," Ethan said, trying to reclaim his usual composure, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. "You don't have to lie," Mason replied, stepping closer. The warmth of his presence was magnetic, undeniable. Ethan could feel it, not just his Omega instincts, but a deeper, almost irrational pull he couldn't name. For a long, suspended moment, they simply looked at each other, rain blurring the edges of the world around them. Then Mason, with a courage Ethan had not anticipated, reached out. His hand brushed Ethan's, tentative, almost shy. A current passed through Ethan's, shock, desire, and the aching sweetness of connection all at once. Ethan's rational mind screamed, "Do not engage. This is unprofessional. Boundaries exist." Yet his body betrayed him, leaning slightly toward Mason, captivated by the softness of his touch, the fragility of his aura, the warmth of his alpha essence. "Ethan," Mason breathed, the sound almost intimate in the quiet street. Yes. Ethan's voice was barely more than a whisper, an admission he didn't yet understand. Mason's fingers traced the seam of Ethan's coat, a deliberate brush that sent a thrill down his spine. I think about you. A lot. When I draw, when I walk, even when I sleep. He faltered, his vulnerability raw, exposed. Ethan's omega instincts clenched and ached in response. A tidal wave of emotion he could not name but recognized with bone-deep clarity. The walls he had built around his heart, meticulous, unyielding, crumbled under Mason's gaze. And then, almost impossibly, Mason leaned closer. Ethan's breath caught, and the world narrowed to the faint scent of rain, charcoal, and Mason's skin. The first touch, tentative and fleeting, was electric, a brush of lips, a whisper of warmth that lingered far longer than the contact itself. That night, as Ethan returned to his apartment, soaked but trembling, he realized the world had irrevocably shifted. Mason, with his delicate hands and fragile sketches, had ignited something within Hyman, emotion he had suppressed for years, locked behind clinical detachment and professional courtesy. For weeks, their interactions became a delicate dance. Brush of hands in the cafeteria, fleeting smiles in the corridor, stolen glances across the bustling city streets. Ethan's friends noticed a change in him. Dr. Calloway, usually the epitome of control, now carried a subtle softness in his gaze, a longing that betrayed his carefully maintained stoicism. One Friday evening, Mason invited Ethan to his small studio in Williamsburg. The space was cluttered with sketches, paintbrushes, and unfinished canvases, a chaotic reflection of Mason's soul. Ethan, uncomfortable in such disorder yet drawn irresistibly to the intimacy of the space, felt the pull between them deepen. "Do you want to see something?" Mason asked, voice almost trembling. He held up a sketch, roughly the size of a poster, and Ethan's breath caught. It was him, meticulously captured in charcoal, eyes intense, coat damp, the city rain haloing him like a reluctant angel. I didn't mean to," Mason began, face flushing crimson. But Ethan interrupted with a hand on his shoulder, grounding, reassuring, yet claiming. "You don't have to explain," Ethan said softly. I like it. I like you." The words were a confession, a promise, a surrender all at once. Mason's eyes glistened, emotions bubbling beneath the surface. You really mean that?" Ethan nodded, hesitating, then leaned forward. Their lips met again, this time with purpose, urgency, and undeniable tenderness. The storm outside faded, the chaos of the city melted away, and for a fleeting, perfect moment, nothing existed except Mason and Ethan, Alpha and Omega, fragile and composed, intertwined in the delicate dance of desire and intimacy. Days turned into weeks. Their bond grew deep and intricate. Ethan found himself craving Mason's laughter, the tilt of his head while sketching, the warmth of his hands in his own. Mason, in turn, thrived under Ethan's quiet, unwavering care, discovering in the cold Omega doctor a sanctuary for his fragility and passion. They argued occasionally, tension flaring from their differences, Ethan's meticulous nature clashing with Mason's artistic chaos, but the friction only forged a deeper connection. Every reconciliation, every hesitant touch, every shared cup of coffee in the rain strengthened the bridge between them. One night, Ethan took Mason to a rooftop overlooking Manhattan, city lights shimmering like stars stolen and scattered across the skyline. I think I want this," Ethan whispered, hands trembling slightly as he held Mason's. "You and me. No barriers. No hesitation. Just us." Mason's response was a soft, radiant smile, hands tightening around Ethan's. "I've been waiting for you to say that. I want it too. More than anything." They kissed, and in that kiss was the culmination of longing, frustration, desire, and trust. The cold Omega and the fragile Alpha had found a delicate equilibrium, a partnership forged in vulnerability, honesty, and the quiet promise of forever. And though life outside continued, patience, deadlines, city noise, they discovered that love, in its purest form, could be both gentle and unyielding, fragile and enduring, chaotic and perfectly ordered. Ethan never imagined that a quiet rooftop in Manhattan could feel like home. But here, with Mason pressed close against his side, the city lights reflecting in their eyes, he understood something fundamental. This fragile alpha had become the axis around which his life now spun, and for the first time in years, he was willing to let the world in. The first test of their bond came sooner than expected. A sudden emergency at the hospital pulled Ethan into a whirlwind of patients and paperwork, leaving Mason feeling abandoned for the first time since they met. The small apartment Mason rented near the Williamsburg waterfront, usually warm with sketches and the faint smell of charcoal and paint, felt like a cage without Ethan's calming presence. I can't do this if you keep disappearing," Mason said one evening, voice trembling, eyes glistening. The sketch pad on his lap was forgotten, covered in sketches of rain-drenched streets and, unmistakably, Ethan's profile in every frame. Ethan looked at him, feeling a pang he had tried to suppress. "Mason, I'm trying. I have responsibilities, lives to save. You know that." "I know. But do you see me? Really see me?" Mason's words cut deeper than any surgical scalpel, and Ethan felt the Omega instinct in him tighten. A combination of guilt, desire, and the ache of wanting to protect and claim. Ethan closed the distance between them, brushing Mason's wet hair back, their foreheads touching. "I see you. Always. You're the most important thing I've ever seen." The words were careful, precise, yet imbued with all the vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. That night, they collapsed into each other on Mason's small futon, rain tapping on the window pane like a gentle applause for their reconciliation. Ethan's hands traced the contours of Mason's shoulders, back, and jawline, memorizing every inch as if the physical map could anchor the emotional one. Mason's alpha warmth pressed into Ethan's Omega body, steadying him, grounding him, reminding him that love, in all its messy, urgent glory, could also be a sanctuary. Over the next few weeks, their bond grew deeper. They navigated the delicate dance of public and private, Ethan keeping his professional boundaries at the hospital while Mason's art began to flourish, inspired by the quiet intensity of their connection. Every sketch, every painting carried a piece of Ethan, captured not just in physical likeness but in essence, the calculated composure, the hidden warmth, the gentle loneliness that only Mason seemed capable of seeing. One rainy Saturday, Mason brought Ethan to a hidden cafe in Brooklyn, a place lit by fairy lights and the smell of espresso, tucked away from the bustle of the city. "I want to show you something," Mason whispered, leading Ethan upstairs to a tiny attic filled with canvases and sketchbooks. "This is amazing," Ethan said, his blue eyes scanning the room. Mason had captured their entire journey in strokes of charcoal, pastel, and ink. There were images of Ethan shielding Mason from rain, Ethan standing solemnly in the hospital corridor, Mason sketching him from across the street, their hands almost touching, lips nearly meeting every moment that had defined them. Mason's voice broke the silence. "I've been trying to capture it all. I don't want to forget even a second." Ethan stepped closer, brushing Mason's cheek with his thumb. "I don't ever want to forget either. I think I've finally realized that you're not just part of my life. You are my life." They kissed there, surrounded by Mason's memories of them. The kiss slow and deliberate, a tether pulling them together through the chaos of life. Ethan marveled at the fragility of this alpha who had so completely captivated his Omega heart, and Mason reveled in the solidity, the warmth, and the quiet strength of Ethan's love. Yet, as with any true Omegaverse story, their happiness wasn't without turbulence. One evening, a complication at the hospital forced Ethan to stay overnight, a series of surgeries that stretched him to his limits. Mason, waiting alone in their apartment, felt an unfamiliar twist of fear, jealousy, and longing. He realized, for the first time, just how dependent he had become on Ethan, not as a doctor, not as a man of reason, but as his alpha, his anchor, his home. When Ethan returned, exhausted and soaked from the relentless rain, Mason ran to him, throwing himself into Ethan's arms. Don't ever leave me like that again, Mason whispered, voice breaking, heart hammering against Ethan's chest. Ethan hugged him back with a quiet laugh that turned into a shiver. I won't. Promise. You're mine, Mason. Only mine. That night, under the soft light of Mason's studio, Ethan traced the lines of Mason's body, memorizing every curve, every subtle tremor of emotion. Mason responded with a shiver, leaning into Ethan, and when their lips met, it was no longer tentative. It was possession, comfort, and undeniable love entwined in one. Ethan's omega instincts flared with a tenderness he could never fully rationalize, and Mason's alpha desire softened, reshaped by Ethan's careful, attentive presence. The weeks passed with shared routines, Ethan making coffee just the way Mason liked it, Mason sketching quietly as Ethan read patient charts nearby, their hands brushing, shoulders touching, a quiet intimacy that needed no words. They learned each other's rhythms, weaknesses, and strengths, and in the process, transformed the fragile into something enduring, the cold into something warm, the lonely into companionship. Then came the turning point, the moment that cemented their commitment. Mason had been commissioned for a gallery exhibit, and Ethan insisted on attending, despite the stress of hospital rotations. The gallery was buzzing with critics and art lovers, and Mason's work was displayed front and center. Every sketch, every painting a testament to their shared journey. Standing beside Mason, Ethan watched as visitors marveled at the depth of emotion captured on canvas. He realized that Mason had not only immortalized their love, but had also shown the world a piece of his own vulnerability. Ethan felt pride swell in his chest, a rare and tender omega emotion, as he pressed a kiss to Mason's temple. You did this, Ethan whispered, and it's perfect. You're perfect. Mason blushed, leaning into Ethan. We did this, together. Ethan's arms tightened around him, sealing the promise in their embrace. The gallery noise faded. The lights, the chatter, the clinking glasses all became background to the heartbeat they shared. In the quiet of the night, back in their shared apartment, they talked about the future not just in whispers or fleeting touches, but with intention, clarity, and hope. Ethan spoke of a life where they could balance careers, art, and love. Mason dreamed aloud of opening a studio together, one where they could create, heal, and grow as partners. And in those quiet, profound moments, they found the rare equilibrium that eluded so many. Love that was tender yet passionate, fragile yet enduring, fleeting yet eternal. The final chapter of their story was written not in grand gestures, but in the subtleties of shared mornings, lingering touches, and mutual devotion. One winter evening, as snow dusted the Brooklyn streets, Mason painted Ethan's portrait, the omega leaning against the studio wall, hands gently brushing Mason's, lips just a whisper apart. I love you, Mason said softly, almost reverently. I love you too, Ethan replied, voice firm, steady, yet full of the tremor of emotion he could no longer hide. Always. They kissed, and the kiss was everything years of longing, chaos, vulnerability, and desire fused into a moment of perfection. Ethan felt the omega warmth bloom fully, harmonizing with Mason's alpha presence. Mason felt the fragile strength of Ethan, his steady heartbeat beneath his fingers, and knew that for the first time, he was truly home. The snow fell outside, covering the city in a soft, white blanket, but inside their studio, warmth radiated from shared laughter, whispered promises, and the quiet intimacy of two men who had found, in each other, a love that was equal parts tender, chaotic, and unshakably real. Ethan's cold omega heart, once isolated and meticulous, now pulsed with vibrant, unguarded life. Mason's fragile alpha spirit, once tentative and uncertain, now soared with the confidence of being cherished, seen, and claimed. Together, they had weathered storms, navigated vulnerability, and discovered a love that transcended fear, pride, and the relentless pull of the world. And as the city slept beneath a blanket of snow, the two men held each other close, lips brushing, hearts beating in perfect unison, knowing that no matter what challenges awaited, they had found something eternal, a love built on trust, intimacy, and the delicate, unbreakable bond of Alpha and Omega. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.